Staff Sergeant Marcus Thorne came home to find his wife had moved on and their son believed he was dead. The bus brakes hissed, a sound like a final, weary exhalation. It was the sound of arrival. For 2 years, every sound had been a warning, the distant crack of a rifle, the guttural roar of an MRAP engine, the unnerving silence before a blast. But this hiss was different. This was the sound of Oak Creek, of home. He swung himself down the steep steps, the worn canvas of his duffel bag digging into his shoulder. The bag was heavy, but its weight was a comfort. It was a physical anchor in a world that had felt untethered for 730 days. Inside were his uniforms, a few tattered paperbacks, and a small, carved wooden bird he'd bought in a Kandahar market for his son, Leo. The air was thick with the smell of rain on hot asphalt and the sweet, damp scent of pine from the surrounding hills. It was a world away from the perpetual taste of dust, the metallic tang of cordite that had been his atmosphere for so long. He breathed it in deep, a man surfacing after too long underwater. He didn't call for a ride. He wanted to walk. He wanted to feel the familiar pavement under his boots, to retrace the steps he'd walked 1,000 times before. A surprise. That was the plan. He'd imagined this moment in the suffocating heat of a forward operating base, in the rattling belly of a Chinook, in the dead of night when sleep wouldn't come. He'd picture Elena's face, the shock giving way to tears of joy. He'd picture Leo, who was 5 when he left, now a full-fledged 7-year-old, running into his arms. The neighborhood was a time capsule. Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses still spilled over her white picket fence. The miller's old Ford pickup, a permanent fixture, sat rusting gently in their driveway. The great oak tree on the corner, the one he and Elena had carved their initials into on their 3rd date, stood as stoic and unchanged as a monument. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. A perfect, preserved diorama of the life he'd fought to protect, the life he was finally home to reclaim. The hope in his chest was a living thing, warm and painfully bright. But as he rounded the final corner onto his own street, the first discordant note played. A flicker of wrongness, like a single pixel out of place on a satellite image. His lawn, which he'd always kept meticulously, was almost too perfect. The edges were razor-sharp, the grass a uniform green that spoke of professional landscaping, not a weekend chore. Then he saw the car. A silver sedan, clean and sensible, sat in the driveway where his own beat-up truck should have been. It wasn't Elena's car. He knew her car. This was an intruder, a foreign object in the heart of his territory. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. His soldier's brain, trained to spot anomalies, started cataloguing details. No welcome home banner. No sign of expectation. The windows were dark, reflecting the afternoon sun with a glassy, vacant stare. The house felt still. Too still. His key, worn smooth from years of use, slid into the lock. He held his breath as he turned it. The click of the tumbler was loud in the suburban quiet. A small victory. It still worked. He was not yet a stranger here. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lavender-scented cleaner and something else, a man's cologne that wasn't his. He set his duffel bag down gently, the silence of the house amplifying the soft thud. His senses were on high alert, his movement slow and deliberate, as if clearing a potentially hostile building. He ran a finger along the entryway table. No dust. But the photos were wrong. The frame that had held a picture of him and Elena on their wedding day now held a picture of her and Leo at the beach. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, it was the same story. Every picture of him, in uniform, in civilian clothes, with his arm around his wife, had vanished. In their place were dozens of photos, Leo on a bike, Elena smiling with friends, the two of them building a snowman. An entire life documented, a life he had no part in. The emptiness was a presence. It was in the perfectly plumped cushions on the sofa, the lack of clutter on the coffee table, the sterile gleam of the hardwood floors. This wasn't the comfortable, lived-in chaos of their home. This was a showroom. A stage set. Then he heard it. A faint sound from the backyard. A murmur of voices, then a peal of childish laughter. Leo! His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. He was here. He was okay. Marcus moved toward the sliding glass door at the back of the living room, his boots making no sound on the polished wood. He stayed in the shadows, his body instinctively using the cover of the doorway. He peered through the glass. And his world detonated. Elena was there, sitting at their patio table, a glass of iced tea in her hand. She was laughing, a genuine, carefree sound he hadn't heard in years. Across from her, tending the barbecue grill, his grill, was a man. A man with sandy hair and a kind face, wearing a polo shirt and khaki shorts. Then Leo came sprinting across the lawn, chasing a soccer ball. He was taller, leaner. His hair was longer. He skidded to a stop near the grill, looking up at the man. The man turned, a spatula in his hand, and ruffled Leo's hair. "Careful, champ," the man said, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. "Sorry, Dad," Leo chirped, before turning and kicking the ball toward the far side of the yard. "Dad." The word was a shaped charge that blasted through Marcus's defenses, his hopes, his entire being. The sound in the world vanished, replaced by a high, keening whine in his ears. His vision tunneled, the vibrant green of the lawn and the blue of the sky turning grey and distant. The strength drained from his limbs, and the heavy duffel bag he'd unconsciously picked back up slipped from his nerveless fingers. It hit the floor with a muffled thud, the sound of a body falling. He stumbled back from the door, his hand over his mouth to stifle a cry. It felt like an IED strike, the kind you never see coming. One moment you're standing, the next the world is fire and noise and nothing makes sense. He was a ghost in his own home, watching a life that was supposed to be his. He couldn't stay. He couldn't breathe. He turned and fled, yanking the front door open and spilling back out into the too bright sun. He left his duffel bag, his wooden bird, his entire past, lying on the floor. He ran, his boots pounding the pavement, not away from a firefight, but from the ruins of his own life. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed a new mission objective. He needed intel. He needed to understand the shape of this new, monstrous reality. His mind, scrambling for a waypoint, a friendly position in this hostile landscape, settled on one name, Father Michael. The old priest was a Vietnam vet, a Marine chaplain who had seen his own brand of hell and had spent the rest of his life tending to the souls of men like Marcus. He found him in the community garden behind St. Jude's, his cassock hitched up as he pulled weeds from a row of tomato plants. Father Michael looked up as Marcus's shadow fell over him. His weathered face, usually set in lines of gentle patience, collapsed into disbelief. He scrambled to his feet, wiping dirt from his hands onto his trousers. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My God. It can't be." "It's me, Father," Marcus said, his own voice a raw, broken thing. "What happened? What the hell happened to my life?" The priest's eyes filled with a deep, bottomless sorrow. He led Marcus to a stone bench under the shade of a maple tree, the air still and heavy. And then, with the gentle, devastating precision of a battlefield surgeon, he told him the story. 6 months after you deployed, Marcus, there was an attack on your convoy. An IED. The initial reports, he paused, his gaze fixed on the church steeple. The initial reports were wrong. They listed 3 casualties. You were one of them. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Kia. Killed in action. The words every soldier's family dreads. 2 men in dress blues came to your door, Father Michael continued, his voice low and steady. They presented Elena with a flag. I presided over your memorial service. The whole town came. We mourned you, son. We buried an empty casket and we grieved for a hero who wasn't coming home. The pieces began to click into place, each one a shard of glass in his heart. The empty house. The new man. The word Dad. It wasn't betrayal. It was a funeral. But they found me, Marcus stammered, his mind reeling. I was a prisoner. They rescued me. The army knew. They had to have told her. They did, the priest confirmed, his expression pained. Weeks later, a correction came through. Missing in action. Then, later, that you'd been recovered. But Marcus, by then, the damage was done. For Elena, the first news was the only news that mattered. It broke something inside her. She'd already gone through the fire. She'd buried her husband. The letters that came after. I think she saw them as a cruel mistake, a bureaucratic error. It was easier to believe you were at peace than to live on the razor's edge of hope. He explained that the man, David, was a counselor she'd met at a support group for grieving military spouses. He had helped her and Leo pick up the pieces of a life shattered by a telegram. He had not replaced Marcus, he had filled a void left by a ghost. Marcus sat on the stone bench, the priest's words washing over him like waves of freezing water. The rage he'd felt was gone, scoured away by a tidal wave of guilt and a profound, hollow ache. He had not been erased. He had been mourned. His wife had not abandoned him, she had survived him. And in doing so, she had built a new life, a fortress of stability for their son on the foundation of his grave. He spent that night in a motel room on the edge of town, the air conditioning unit rattling like a machine gun. The room was anonymous, sterile, a perfect reflection of how he felt, stripped of identity, of purpose, of home. What was his mission now? The soldier in him screamed to charge in, to reclaim his territory, to tear down the life they had built and reassert his own. He was the husband. He was the father. It was his right. But the man, the aching, broken man, wasn't so sure. Could he be the IED that destroyed their lives a second time? Could he look his son in the eye and detonate the world of safety and love that had been so carefully constructed around him? The next morning, he went to the town park. He found a spot behind a thick oak tree, the rough bark digging into his back. He watched from a distance as Elena and Leo arrived, followed by David. They spread a blanket on the grass. David pushed Leo on the swings, his laughter mixing with the boys'. Elena watched them, and a real, unguarded smile touched her lips. It was a smile of peace. A smile he had not seen on her face since before the war. He was watching a photograph he was no longer in. He was a ghost at the feast. Then, Leo, chasing a stray frisbee, ran toward his hiding spot. He ran with the joyous, unthinking abandon of a child who feels utterly safe in his world. The frisbee landed just a few feet from the tree. Marcus's heart seized. He could stay hidden. He could melt back into the shadows and disappear. But his body moved before his mind could object. He took a half step out from behind the trunk. Leo saw him and stopped short. He looked at the tall man in the faded fatigues, a stranger with haunted eyes. There was no flicker of recognition, no spark of memory. Just a child's simple curiosity. Marcus sank to one knee, bringing himself down to the boy's level. The ground was damp beneath his jeans. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice husky. Leo tilted his head. "Who are you?" The question was an innocent blade that slipped between his ribs. "I'm your father. I'm the man who thought of you every second I was gone. I'm the reason you exist." But the words wouldn't come. He saw the peaceful world behind Leo, the blanket, the mother, the man who was now dad. He could not be the storm that wrecked it all. He made his choice. A new sacrifice. For them. "I'm a friend of your dad's," Marcus said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "We served together." A shadow of sadness crossed Leo's small face, a practiced, familiar grief. "My mom said you died," he whispered, his voice small but certain. "She said you were a hero." Marcus felt the last of his old life break away and drift into the past. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. He was, kid. He was the best. The meeting with Elena, 2 days later in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than any patrol, any firefight. The shock on her face when she saw him was terrifying. It was the face of a woman seeing a spectre, a nightmare made flesh. There were tears, choked apologies, and waves of guilt that radiated from her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make accusations. He just told her what Father Michael had explained. He told her he understood. He told her he had seen them in the park. "He's happy, Elena," Marcus said, his hands wrapped around a cold coffee cup. "Leo is happy. And you look peaceful." "Marcus, I thought you were gone," she wept, her words fractured. "I buried you. I had to. I had to keep going. For him." "I know," he said. And he did. He finally did. And I won't be the one to wreck that. I won't take his father from him twice. He laid out his plan, his terms of surrender. He would sign over the house, the accounts. He would get an apartment in the next town over. He would, for all legal and practical purposes, remain a ghost. For now. He would give them space, give them time. It was a tactical retreat, not to save himself, but to protect the civilians. 6 months passed. The sharp edges of grief began to dull, replaced by a persistent, low-grade ache. Marcus found a job with a construction company, channeling his engineer's mind into blueprints for community centers and small-town bridges. He was building again. It felt right. He lived in a small, clean apartment above a hardware store. He joined a veteran support group that met in the basement of St. Jude's, run by Father Michael. He sat in a circle with other men who were haunted by their own ghosts and learned to speak their language. And every other Saturday, he drove his new, second-hand truck to the park in Oak Creek. He was no longer Staff Sergeant Thorne or Dad or Elena's husband. He was Uncle Mark, his dad's best friend from the army, the man who knew all the stories. He taught Leo how to tie a figure-8 knot. He showed him pictures of the strange, beautiful deserts where his father had been a hero. He answered his questions with a careful mix of truth and love, building a new relationship from the rubble of the old one. One cool autumn afternoon, they were in the small workshop Marcus had set up in his rented garage. Sawdust hung in the air, smelling of pine and potential. They were working on a complex wooden model of a suspension bridge, a project that had consumed their last few weekends. Leo was focused, his small hands carefully holding a miniature truss while Marcus applied a line of wood glue. His brow was furrowed in concentration, an exact mirror of the expression Marcus saw in the shaving mirror each morning. "Uncle Mark," Leo asked, his eyes still fixed on their work, "do you think my dad would have liked building bridges?" Marcus stopped, the glue bottle hovering over the wood. He looked at his son, this wonderful, resilient boy who was both his and not his. He saw the future in the boy's clear eyes, and he felt the gaping hole in his own chest fill with something other than pain. It was a quiet, aching, but profound sense of purpose. This was his new mission. Not to reclaim a past that was gone, but to build a bridge to the future. To his son. His voice was thick when he answered, heavy with all the things he would never say. "Yeah, kid," he managed, a sad smile touching his lips. "I think he would have loved it."